Welcome to An Honorable Profession, a podcast giving America hope since 2018. I'm Ryan Coonerty. Along with Debbie Cox Bultan of the New Deal, I'm lucky enough to be your co-host. An Honorable Profession is a New Deal Leaders podcast. The New Deal is an organization that supports the next generation of American leaders. From attorneys generals, to state senators, to mayors, to school board members, these are the people that are pushing policies and politics that will respond to climate change, rebuild our economy, address racial injustice, and restore our democracy. These are incredibly talented people who have dedicated themselves to public service when their country and their communities needed it the most. Check out newdealleaders.org to see what I'm talking about.
Welcome to An Honorable Profession. I'm Debbie Cox Bultan, CEO of the New Deal, where we're proud to support so many of the inspiring leaders you hear on this podcast. In this episode, I spoke with Manny Diaz, former two-term mayor of Miami and the newly elected chair of the Florida Democratic Party. We talked about what it will take for Democrats to win Florida, including how best to reach Hispanic voters in his state, as well as redistricting and the recent voter suppression legislation signed by the governor. We also talked about his personal journey into public service, escaping Castro's Cuba with his mother when he was only 6, to becoming mayor and helping transform his city into the thriving metropolis and American icon that Miami is today. So Manny Diaz, welcome to An Honorable Profession.
Thank you. Thank you, Debbie.
It's great to see you.
Good to see you.
We've got so much to talk about. I just want to dive straight in. I just read a recent profile of you, and in that they referred to being party chair as the least desirable or most thankless job in politics, I think. So I just want to start by with you becoming new Florida party chair in January. Why did you want to be party chair?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah. I think, I'm the kind of person all my life that when I've seen something that needs to be fixed, something that's wrong, something that's broken, I have a hard time not stepping up. I don't know why I got that gene, but I got it. Another example I would give you is despite the fact that I had been involved in politics since I was in high school, I had always sworn that I would never run for office. I told my friends that if I ever even had a conversation contemplating the idea of running for office, that they had authority to put me out of my misery immediately. And so despite all of my involvement, people were always thinking that, all of this was being done in order to build a resume to run for office. And I kept telling everybody, no, that's not why I'm doing it. And I don't care to run for office. And so I got away with that until 2000. And then in 2000, the city had gotten to such a bad state. I mean, I couldn't travel and not chat with somebody on an airplane. And when I told them I was from Miami, they said, "Oh, I'm sorry to hear that." The reputation that we had nationally and internationally was terrible. A couple things happened in 2000 as well. The first was that my father passed away. And, when we talk about my personal life, you'll learn that, I was the classic immigrant story, hardworking man, worked 2-3 jobs. So I had a shot at the American dream and so many like him. I mean, so many in this area that have a similar story. And so I just woke up one day and said, my God, this can't be their legacy. They've worked too hard, have their children live the American dream. And that's not the legacy that I want for my dad and for all the others like him. And so I've got to do something about it. And, I looked around and I said, how do I fix this? And I said, well, you got to be on the inside. And Miami is the brand name here. To many of you from up north, anything south of Orlando is Miami. And Miami / Cuban Americans defines this area and who we are. And so I have to run for office. And why don't I run for mayor? Because the mayor has the bully pulpit. I mean, this was not I'll run for city commission first and serve a term or two, and then run for mayor, and then run for something else. Remember, I didn't want to do this in the first place. So I went right to where I felt change could happen. And I ran against every mayor from 1973 to 2001, an incumbent city commissioner, former city manager, former city attorney. There were, I think, 9 or 10 of us in the race. So if you were thinking about the smart political move to make, that was not it. It checked all the boxes for why not to do it. But, I said, this is what I want, and I'm committed to doing it. And so I felt that pit in my stomach and decided to do it and won. And so now going to the party, I kind of had that, I had been feeling a bit of anxiety leading up to, November 2020. But November 2020 sort of put the nail in the coffin. This also wasn't the Democratic Party that I grew up in. Something was amiss. And so I've got to fix it. Same thing. And how do I fix it? Well, I guess I should be chair of the Florida Democratic Party. So how do you become chair of the Florida Democratic Party? I didn't even know. I didn't even know if I qualified. And until a few months earlier, I wouldn't qualify because you had to be inside the party structure in order to have the qualifications to be able to run for the top spot. You couldn't just walk off the street and say, I'm running for this. But they had amended the bylaws to allow a member of the DNC Finance Committee to qualify. And so, I said, okay, fine. I called up there and I said, I want to be on the Finance Committee. They said, write a check. So I wrote a check and I qualified. And that's it. I mean, that's, yeah. And so I had never been involved institutionally in the party. I had not been an active participant in Florida Democratic Party matters or even local structural, local executive committees of the party or anything like that. Like most people, I had worked primarily with candidates and causes and things, but never within the structure.
Yeah, yeah.
So I was a real outsider, and that's why I decided to run.
I love it, and I mean, you are coming into this after coming out of 2020 into 2022. You've got a lot going on there in Florida. You've got your election for governor, other statewide officers, the Marco Rubio Senate seat, legislative seats, and I know you ran on a platform for party chair, uniting Democrats across the state. I think you've got ideas like doing a 67 county strategy, as well as opening a central Florida office, which hasn't existed before. So, you talked about 2020 being a catalyst for what prompted you to get into the race for the chair. What do you think is going to take to turn things around for Democrats in Florida?
Well, it's going to take a number of things. It's never just one thing. If it was a mistake that we made in, October or September of 2020, then any idiot could assume this position and fix that problem. This has been a problem that's been brewing for a very, very long time. And now that even when I ran for mayor, like I said, I've been involved in politics all my life, but I had never been in the belly of the beast. And so the same thing is true here. I mean, I obviously knew in my gut that there were problems, but I didn't know the extent of the problems. And so, yes, and I'll tell you why that strategy is so important, because we haven't built, to me, it's basic. I mean, I've been involved not just in politics, but in business all my life. And I've been involved in a number of turnaround situations, including in the city, but also in the private sector. And one thing that is that you have to build, in order to turn things around, you have to build a solid foundation of an organization that is a well-oiled machine, which is not what the party is, by far. I guess the analogy I would make is that this is like a carnival. It comes into town, and they put up all the tent and the cotton candy and everything else, and they ramp up, and then when the carnival's over, they just shut down and go home till next year. And so, for example, you have in the last decade, the Democratic registration has increased by 700,000. Republican registration has increased by 1.2 million, and the MPAs have increased by 1.6 million, the no party affiliates. So in 2012, the last time that Obama's reelection, and he won Florida, we had close to a 600,000 vote margin in registration over the Republicans. And that went down to 100,000 by 2020. And so, you can point to a lot of issues. You can point to COVID. You can point to a whole number of things. But if you don't have the numbers to begin with, it's harder. There's no margin of error. So that sort of stares you in the face. The other thing that you realize is that in the odd years, when I talk about a sustainable organization year round, in the odd years, we lost an average of almost 100,000 votes per year. So when everybody gears up to do a voter registration drive in the election year, you are already starting with a deficit of 100,000. So if you registered 200, you really only gained 100 because you lost 100 the year before. So, those are the kinds of things that tell you that over time, you keep making those mistakes and it's going to catch up with you. And it caught up with us. Now, the flip side, the good news is that since 1992, the margin of victory in presidential elections in Florida has been less than 200,000. We lost a U.S. Senate incumbent in 2018 by 10,000 votes. A governor's race, we lost by 30,000 votes. Rick Scott, our senator, who won that Senate election, got elected governor twice by no more than 1%. So this has traditionally been, people describe it, you're the 1% state because all elections are very close. Well, it just goes to show that had we done a little more registration, had we done a little more voter engagement, a better get out the vote operation, 10,000, 30,000 votes. My God, that could be one building in Miami. Almost, right? So
yeah, those are amazing numbers given how big Florida is. That those races are that close. I'm not sure everyone really understands that. It is those are razor thin. Yeah.
Yeah, and so have we made a lot of mistakes? Yes, but is it reversible? Absolutely. Look at those results. And by the way, here's another thing. Every 2 years in general state elections, we have referendums, ballot initiatives. In 2020, while Trump was winning the state, we also passed a minimum wage law in Florida. In 2018, we passed felon voter restoration. In 2016, we passed medical marijuana. In 2014, we passed a sweeping land and water conservation environmental initiative. In 2012, we passed we fought back actually an attack on reproductive rights and women's rights. In 2010, we passed the Fair Districts Amendment, which I know you want to talk about redistricting, which has the toughest standards. Well, at least at the time that we passed it, I actually chaired that effort in 2010, the toughest standards in the country. And they can try to mess with it, and they will for sure. But there are standards that have to be met, and if they don't comply with those standards, the courts will throw it out. We litigated after passage in 2010. We litigated for 3 or 4 years, I forget, because they drew districts that were gerrymandered, and the courts threw them out, and they had to go back and start over again.
Yeah.
So in other words, we're passing all these, typically Democratic Party issues that the Republicans fought tooth and nail against us on all of those.
Yeah.
Right. On each and every single one of them. But yet they voted for Trump.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's an interesting dichotomy. You're talking about this being passed, obviously, but through referendum or initiative, not, and then, but the things that are coming out of your legislature or the vote for Trump seem incongruous with some of those statewide initiatives. So that's, what do you make of that kind of just, that difference there?
And by the way, to pass these referendums requires 60%. Because the Republicans did that. They made it a little harder so that all these, liberal issues that they don't care for would be tougher to pass. In fact, this last session, they added another obstacle to it by saying that they established limits on contributions for these referendum issues because we don't want these, rich liberals coming in from out of town and helping fund these crazy radical ideas like minimum wage.
Yeah, right.
So, what do I think about that? I think that's the party's fault because it's obvious that people believe in those issues that are our issues.
Mm-hmm.
So if there are issues and they believe in those issues, why aren't they voting for us? Whose fault is that? I don't blame the Republicans for that. That's our fault because we haven't been able to make that connection and communicate to those people that, hey, we're the party that's fighting, obviously, for the issues you care about. And that hasn't been done.
Yeah, yeah. I'd love to ask you one other political question because I think it's one of the main storylines that came out nationally about the 2020 election in Florida at the presidential level, which was the Hispanic vote. And in particular, I think a surprise from some people that some Hispanics, such a large percentage, particularly of Cuban Americans, voted for Trump. You're a Cuban American yourself. What do you tell people that about the Hispanic vote in Florida generally or nationally that they should understand, or that, does that surprise you or not surprise you, and why or why not?
It doesn't. Well, it doesn't surprise me. It disappoints me. It doesn't surprise me because I have personally been fighting that fight for over 40 years. And what is that fight? It's you are ignoring us. You are taking us for granted. You don't understand us. You think we're some sort of monolithic community. None of your consultants that you send down here speak Spanish. No offense to anybody from Iowa, but, it's like, hey, and then not only, but the worst part, of course, is that they come here, they don't speak our language, they don't understand the culture, but yet they tell us what to do. And it's like, listen, I've lived here since I was a kid. I mean, I know this community. I know the messaging that works. I know what we have to do, blah, 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 blah. And it's like, no, this is what you have to do. So, okay, fine. And so, so number one, it's just a total disregard and lack of, I guess the term is, cultural competence to deal with what they, with what they have to deal with. Generally, the campaign, the Republicans, I mean, they started this back in 1968 with Richard Nixon, when 1968 happened to coincide with sort of the first wave of us that had arrived in the early 60s, the time frame for converting to citizenship. And so they were very smart to sort of target on this new large group of people that had arrived in America who were about to become citizens to become Republicans. And so we fought that initially. And then with Watergate, the tide turned and there was, strong support for Democrats and voting for Carter then and blah, blah, blah. And then that didn't work. And then Reagan came in and did the same thing, worked the community. And, turned it back around, and then sort of Clinton turned it back the other way. And then with Bush and terrorism, it went back the other way. It's a very volatile community, because it doesn't have that long-term connection. But then Obama turned it back around the other way. And so, it's you have to know and understand in your gut and in your heart why that volatility exists. And so there's no one size fits all. And if you don't understand that, you will lose the community.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and so it gives me a little bit of hope in what you're saying, that it's that can be turned around again with the right kind of approach and the right kind of sensitivity and messaging. So that gives me a little hope. You mentioned redistricting. I do want to talk about that for a minute. I think a lot of people in Florida thought you might end up with 2 congressional seats, and you ended up with 1 additional. Many people have talked about that being a result of potentially an undercount in the census, both because of COVID and also the citizenship question fight, whether that should be on there. So yeah, I guess my 2 questions is that right? Is that your sense of what happened? And
Absolutely.
Also, what do you how does that impact your thinking as party chair about your strategy with the redistricting?
Well, it's absolutely, by the way, thank you, Donald Trump, again, for, the whole mess around the census. By the way, I went through it. I remember I got elected in 2001. So my election coincided with the release of the census data.
Right.
And through my work as mayor and with the Conference of Mayors, we automatically sued the census every year. When they come out with their American survey, I forgot what it's called.
Yeah, right.
Right. Updates, estimates, because we knew they were underestimating. I mean, there were like a gazillion buildings. I mean, in my 8 years, by the way, 135 high-rise buildings were built in the city. And yet the population numbers weren't fluctuating. It's like, wait, I know I didn't do very well in math when I was in high school, but I think I can add up that something's happening here. And so, we were suing every year. And even then I left office, and then the 2010 census, I still think undercounted. In fact, I know they undercounted. We did everything we could, including, by the way, reaching out to all these buildings that were going up. We were actually working with the management of all of these high-rise buildings so that they would get access, they would have access, easy access into the buildings. But I circled back with a lot of those managers, and they said they never came. So, it's the course of least resistance. It's amazing to me that in a country as technologically advanced as ours, that we can't figure this out.
Yeah.
And we still have the guy with the clipboard knocking on a door, trying to figure out who lives in a particular place. Right. So absolutely. And then this year, this past year, that was all politics. That was 100% all politics. It had nothing to do with, the original intent of why do a census. And yes, it did hurt us. And yes, we should have had 2 congressional districts, and now we're only going to have 1. And by all indications, the experts are telling me that it's more than likely to be in Central Florida, not in Central Florida. Districting, look, they're going to, the census has been delayed. There are still, they released sort of general numbers, but nothing specific. And that's not going to happen until, by last count, end of September. So it's obviously delayed. And then, you need to start doing the mapping and blah, blah, blah. And then next year's session is at the beginning of the year, January and February, I think. So, there's a committee formed, but committee members have not been named. So if I had to guess today, is they're going to wait till the last minute and then try to ram it through, and then have us, get our hair on fire and start filing lawsuits and then litigate this thing for the next bunch of years.
And you mentioned the initiative that passed about fair districts. So in the litigation, are you concerned that that's going to impact elections next year, that we're not going to be able to get them done? Or, how does that play out eventually?
Yeah, no, I am. And you may have to go with whatever they do until it gets reversed. And it's just, it's messy, and it doesn't need to be, it shouldn't be. Our motto for the campaign was that, voters should be the ones selecting their representatives, not the other way around. And that's in essence what they do.
Yeah.
And it's a shame because it's anti-democratic.
Yeah. Well, while we're on that subject, let's talk about another anti-democratic thing going on in Florida, which we're all been watching nationally, which is your voter suppression bill that passed the legislature and was signed by the governor recently. I saw you do a statement on it. It mirrors what's happening around the country, certainly. But what's so interesting to me about Florida, or one thing that's interesting, is that so many of your officials were touting how successful the election process was in Florida before they then turned around and decided they needed to solve all these, air quoting here, problems.
Fraud. Rampant fraud.
Rampant fraud that wasn't existing when we first finished the election. So what is your take on the impact of this? And it's just devastating to watch what's happening around the country.
It really is. And I'm praying to God that they pass something federally so that we're all subject to the same thing, and different states don't have different rules. We fought hard. The bill looked much, much worse when it first came out. And we did water it down. We're not as bad as some of what we've seen in Texas or Georgia or other places. But it's like, choosing the least bad, the least unconstitutional. Some people, actually friends of mine, argued that we should have just let the worst of it pass so that we have a better chance of reversing it in court. The problem, by the way, is for fair districts and redistricting and this bill and other things, because there's like 4 or 5 lawsuits going on right now, is the fact that the Supreme Court of Florida, the makeup is very different than it was in the early part of the last decade when we were litigating all these issues. It's now, a Republican dominated. In fact, the person that wrote the minority opinion, the dissenting opinion in the redistricting case, is now the Chief Justice of our Supreme Court. So it's scary. And then, of course, taking it up to the Supremes in D.C. is not great either. And the 11th Circuit, which is our appellate circuit, is not great either. So it's a tough fight.
Yeah.
Hopefully we'll end up in the right place. But I mean, they've made it very, very difficult strategically. It's all a plan.
Yeah. And your hope is really that with the federal HR1, that we have to do something federally to standardize this as opposed to fight this out in every state. Is that right?
Yeah, I got to tell you that if I were in Congress right now, that would be my number one priority. Because if we can't protect our democracy, then infrastructure and all those other things are great, but let's protect the democracy first.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I completely agree with you. Well, again, great segue on infrastructure. I think, as a former mayor, we do have some good news finally coming out of Washington, besides what we were just talking about in terms of having a new administration. I know how close you are to President Biden, and they've already passed the American Rescue Plan, which is going to provide really significant funding for so many issues that we're dealing with as we're coming out of the pandemic and trying to build a better America post-COVID. We have hopes that we can do something even more with the American Jobs Plan and the American Families Plan. So both with your hat on as a former mayor and your party hat on, what's the feeling about this in Florida? Or do you feel like people understand the significance of this? Are you hopeful that we're going to make some real transformational change? Why is this important?
Well, I think it is, by the way, and the numbers bear it out. And even in the ARP, we had a coalition of Democratic and Republican mayors in the state who were pushing for this. And by the way, one of the biggest beneficiaries of the ARP was the Republican legislature, because months earlier they were crying poverty about how bad things were and how sales tax revenues had gone down and they didn't have enough money and there were going to have to be steep cuts all across the state in terms of services and this, that, and the other. Well, guess what? They just passed the biggest budget in Florida history. And guess what? They gave all of our first responders and teachers and nurses a $1,000 bonus because of the ARP.
Right.
So, I mean, on the one hand, by the way, this got passed with like zero Republican support in Congress. But on the other hand, they're having lots of pats on the back and ribbon cuttings and programs that are being funded only because of the ARP. So, I think people see that. I mean, I think people, from whether it's, look, these are direct payments, so this is not like, some other crazy thing. And by the way, I don't think Biden signed every check. Trump did.
I think that's true.
Yeah, right. But so people are getting checks. People are receiving rental assistance. Our governments are receiving money to help so that people don't have to pay more taxes. Billions of dollars that went into vaccination programs in Florida and elsewhere, and not just went into our state, but were also designed to be equitable in terms of its rollout. So, and by the way, the numbers bear it. I mean, the job creation, the growth in the economy, the growth in retail, and ultimately the growth in Biden's numbers. It's got very positive numbers everywhere.
Yeah.
I think people saw that, empathy. We spent 4 years with like not only zero empathy, negative empathy, because there was just no caring for the struggles and the problems that people were experiencing through no fault of their own. I mean, it's not like so you can't blame somebody for a virus that just hit us all of a sudden, all of us, and so again, small businesses that were now able to reopen, they were very trying times, and Biden and the Democrats are the ones that stepped up.
Yeah, absolutely.
Passed this bill.
Absolutely. And I the most important thing is that it happened and that those people that needed are getting that help and that relief. And to your point, the businesses are opening back up, our economy is opening back up. So, but I have to just ask, since about politics on this, to your earlier point, It is frustrating, I know, for people who live in states where the Republicans are in charge, governors and legislatures, where they're out taking credit for this help when they weren't supporting it. I mean, what do you think of the politics of this and how it bears out as we head into the midterms?
I think they'll pay a price. I think they'll pay a price because, and the other thing that they're seeing is a president who is really, really, really trying hard now, especially now, to make it bipartisan. It's like, come on, guys. I mean, certainly we can agree on something. And by the way, Trump ran on, infrastructure was one of his big deals, right? When he ran. Okay, so here's an infrastructure bill. Oh, no, we're not going to support that. Why not? Well, because it's not ours. Well, I mean, these are the American people, and the dramatic impact on things like, for example, one of the things that has really, I find in talking to people, and even interviewing people for jobs with the Florida Party, is last year was really a reflection point for a lot of people. And the guy serving drinks at the local bar, making man or woman, making $10 an hour or $12 an hour, all of a sudden, sitting at home thinking, like, is this what I want to do the rest of my life? Do I want to be, 55 serving drinks, making $13 an hour? And so a lot of people, I think, are, thinking about going back to school. So and doing something, whatever it is, rocket scientist or a carpenter, I don't, whatever you want to do, but it's something other than what you're doing now. The difficulty in one of the biggest impediments, childcare.
Yes.
All of a sudden, yeah, you're home, but you're not paying for childcare. And if you're the bartender and you're paying for childcare, you may be spending more on childcare than you are, making whatever salary you're making serving drinks. So, it's like a real reflection point in terms of what should I do? And again, a lot of these programs are designed to help you get a college education for free, get support in terms of childcare, and all those things. To me, all those things are not, Republicans say, oh, spending. To me, they're investments. Because if you look, when I, and we'll talk about my personal story again, but when I was in school, my first job was when I was 14 years old. It was a program called CETA, Comprehensive Employment Training Program, which was designed for kids that live below the poverty level. And I was a janitor at a school, painting, cleaning up after school and painting desks and doing stuff like that. I was making $1.10 an hour. I thought I was like set. I mean, I could take my girlfriend to Burger King and splurge on a Whopper, and all that stuff. But my point is, those programs don't exist anymore. But the government made a small investment in me, and they don't always work. True, granted. But I promise you, I've paid back that $1.10 a millionfold, right?
Yeah.
And so to me, these are investments that you make in your people, because if your people have the opportunity to fight for the American dream by going to school, by getting some sort of assistance in terms of, childcare or whatever it is, those are investments that you're making in people so that they can improve themselves. Not because the Republican assumption sometimes is people are lazy. And if we give them money, they're all going to sit around and drink beer and get fat at home. And I have a totally different view, because that's where I came from. And that's where many of us came from, in terms of the fact that government said, okay, we're going to invest in this little Cuban kid. And we think we're going to get it back. You don't always make the right investment, but most of them are.
Yeah.
Most of them do pay off. And that's how you become a better country.
That's right.
That's
right. Absolutely. No, I couldn't agree with you more. And I think that the investment is exactly right. That's what we're talking about is a transformational, generational investment that it's been really underinvested for many, many, many decades, frankly, to try to get this country and the people in it to have that opportunity that they need to succeed. So let's talk about how you got here. Let's talk about your story. You have such a compelling story, Manny, and you came here with your mom when I think you were 6. Is that right? From
That's right.
fleeing Castro's Cuba. Tell us about how you got to America and how being an immigrant shaped your view of you've talked a little bit about it already, but about the country, but also about public service.
Yeah. So I was 6. My family was okay in Cuba. I mean, they were not starving, but they were, my dad had been, they had created when he was a young man, a boarding school. And one of the good things that particular president did, and they recruited 250 of the poorest kids on the island. He was one of them. And then from that, he got a job with the electric company of Cuba, and just basically spent the rest of his life there until Castro. When Castro seized power, a group of his colleagues went out on strike because he nationalized private business, and so they all got rounded up and thrown in jail. And that's where he was for a couple of years. Every single one of the guys he went in with were executed. My mom had to, visit him in jail all the time. And what they would do is they were doing summary executions, and they would make, the wives walk through the area where they were executing people up against the wall, blood, all over the ground, and they would make them walk through that. They would, strip search them. They would look through whatever care package they were bringing and take whatever they wanted to take from it. So my dad was pretty adamant that, you got to get our son out of here because this is only going to get worse. So get out while you can. My mom didn't want to leave because, she's leaving her husband.
Yeah, sure.
He just said, look, I'll divorce you. We'll worry about whether I can get out later or not, but we got to get our son out. And that's the number one priority. And so that's how I ended up here. When we came here, we moved in with my mom's brother, my uncle, who had been here already. And, it was eight of us in a, 2-bedroom apartment in the area we have since referred to as Little Havana. I was a typical immigrant kid. Living in the streets, playing a lot of sports. That's a good thing. That's the thing that kept me alive. My best friend in elementary school grew up to be one of the biggest cocaine dealers in American history. A really bad guy. I did not
know that. Wow.
Oh, yeah. He was my buddy, and so part of that was that the reason why my uncle had taught in this school in Cuba that was a Jesuit Catholic school, and so he said, we got to try to put Manny in there because those guys will beat him in the head until he straightens out, and so they did. I tried like crazy to flunk the entrance exam because by the way, they didn't have girls in the school. It was an all boys school.
Well, there you have it.
No way I'm going to that school. But somehow I passed, or they made it up. I'm not sure which one. And so that really sort of straightened me out. I kept playing sports, and I'm very competitive. And so seeing all these other kids in that school who some of their parents had actually brought money from the island, and so they were already living in the suburbs, kind of thing. But I don't like to lose, and so that competition forced me, or made I want to study and work hard. So I did. I was first member, obviously, of the family to graduate from college, and did all kinds of weird jobs. I had a job when I was at FIU, the university, that it was cleaning a bingo parlor. But I had an 8 o'clock class in the morning, so I had to go like between 4 and 7 to be able to clean up the place and then tidy up and go to class.
Wow.
So but it didn't matter because I had a goal in mind, and the thing that in high school, actually probably middle school, the big transition for me was, well, number one, I had gone through the experience of losing a country, right, and being uprooted and all of a sudden finding yourself somewhere else, and so that sort of creates a sense of, as you get older, like, how the hell did that happen? Why am I here? And so it creates a sense of, that's not going to happen to me. I'm going to be involved in this thing so that I could keep that from happening. Because I think part of the problem in the home country was that people just weren't political. People were just, Batista and Castro and this guy and that guy. They can do whatever they want as long as they don't bother me. Well, and so, give dictators free rein. Doesn't work. So I think that had an impact. I also was growing up, in the 60s and late 60s and 70s. I remember our government teacher walking in the first day of class and saying something like, so if you guys were driving down some, dark road in Alabama and a big old burly sheriff came up and, stopped you and arrested you or whatever, but you know what your rights are? And I was like, no, I don't. I think I'd like to know.
Yeah.
And then finally, the Jesuit education. The Jesuit education's mantra is, it's meant for others because it's a all boys school, but men and women for others. So there's instilled in you this sense of, you got to get back. You're fortunate to be here, but you've got to get back and help those that come after you. So the combination of all those things really led me to have this commitment to public service.
I love it. I do need to say, since you didn't say it, I think your dad did get out of Cuba and got to America, just so our listeners aren't going to their Google to make sure that. So that was a good story, good ending to that part of a horrifying story. And I guess, you talked a little bit earlier about then, you had said you would never run for office, but eventually you said, hey, if I'm going to make a difference, I'm going to do this. I mean, you did serve 2 years, as most people know, as a mayor of Miami, really, and transformed that city, frankly. When you came in, it was two terms. I said 2 years, sorry, 2 terms, 8 years. They're
going to Google.
Yeah, they'll Google that. I was off on that one, right? Yeah, but you really transformed it. You transformed it from somewhere that you said where you were on a plane, people are saying, I'm sorry, you're from Miami. And, Miami's a thriving metropolitan hub of this country these days, and arts and culture. And I know you spent a lot of time thinking about, you talked about the high rises, but you, got national recognition for your work around sustainable smart cities, walkable cities. So when you look back at, your time as mayor, is there anything you're most proud of as what you're able to accomplish in those 8 years?
Well, it's the brand. Really, literally, you took a dysfunctional laughingstock and made it into one of the most well-known, attractive brands in the world. Again, that same person on the airplane that gave me condolences for living here would now be saying, oh, how cool. Oh, Miami. Oh, wow, that's great. Yeah, by the way, I have an office there. I have a condo there. I have family there. I went there last week. There's always like a real connection with the city and with people. And within that, though, of course, it just doesn't happen. Particularly, one of the things that I love, stats that I love is, 60% of our residents are foreign born. So, when I hear the immigration debate, which, by the way, I've been fighting since I started doing all this stuff, and it seems like it's like Groundhog Day. I keep having the same fight, 40 years later.
Yeah.
But I tell people, look, this is America. This is the new face of America. People, and by the way, we're not where we are because we're just like really smarter than anybody else. No, we went through hell in the 80s. From an immigrant point of view, we had an anti-bilingual ordinance, which was, English only, and that was only a disguise for, we really don't like you.
Yeah.
we were the riot capital of the country. We were the murder capital of the country, the drug capital of the country. We had growing pains. In fact, I'll tell you, a lot of what I did in those early years of my life were designed to build bridges in this community because of the internal strifes that we were having and the racial and ethnic issues that we were facing, because I felt an obligation and the ability, because I grew up raised in a Cuban American household where I ate Cuban food and listened to Cuban music and blah blah blah, and had all the cultural benefits of that. But I also turned on TV and watched Bonanza or Father Knows Best or Leave It to Beaver or any of those shows back then, and listened to the Beatles, and I was a normal regular American kid. So I always felt very comfortable in either culture, because I was very much a part of both cultures, and so that put me in a position where I felt I could be a bridge. And I spent many a year working in over a decade working in organizations designed to build bridges in this community. And then in 2000, it was almost like a repeat of my experience in 1980. What really triggered me in the mayoral decision was seeing a picture of a scene after Elian Gonzalez, which, as you know, I represented the family as a lawyer, and seeing a picture or seeing some news clip or something where there's a sort of a very redneck looking guy with a Confederate flag standing on a street corner in Miami somewhere, next to a black woman with a sign saying Cubans go home. And it was like, so the symbol of hatred that is standing next to you is tolerable at this particular moment so that you can collectively come after me. There is something definitely wrong with that picture.
Absolutely.
Right. And so that was it. I mean, if you can't unite people, if you can't bring people together, you can't achieve all the other things that we've been talking about for a city. And so, like I said, I'm proud to say, yeah, we're not perfect, but it was a realization that we have tremendous potential because we have so much diversity that it's really our strength, and we can do this, and we have to do it. You know why? Because this is the new America. I remember in the early part of my first term when mayors, colleagues from Virginia, North Carolina, Tennessee, places like that, were coming to me and saying, hey, we've got a lot of Latinos moving into our city. Give me some advice. What do I do? How can I welcome them, be accommodating, help, blah, blah, blah. So I kind of saw, mayors see everything first, right? Because you're on the ground. So I started to see that demographic shift in places in the country that didn't have it before. And so, that's the point. The point is, look, the face of America is changing. And if you want to see it firsthand right now, go to Miami and see it. So I'm very proud of that. It's like you said, the buildings are, yeah, so what? But what excites me is, when I see street furniture, that's what mayors do, street furniture. When I see, cycling and the growth of people on bicycles, when I see the growth, and when I take my daughter to our Performing Arts Center, which before, in the 1990s, we would have had to fly to New York to see a play or an opera or a ballet. Now we see it here. So, the growth in the quality of life for everything that we did is what's created the Miami that it is today.
It's wonderful. Congratulations. Thank you for that too. I do want to say, I want to end one thing on your family. I do love what I think I read. You were talking about your Jesuit education. You were in your sports and how that kept you alive. And I believe you scored the first touchdown for your school. And I know now that your son is the Hurricane coach.
Miami Hurricanes. It's all about
football. The so that is quite a full circle story as well. I loved when I read that.
Yeah. But that was the good news, because then, of course, when he came down, then he started getting all the ink in town, which was great for me. I mean, I loved it. Okay, nobody's bothering me.
I love it. Share the love. Share the love. Well, I can't thank you enough for being with us today. I think our listeners are going to love getting to know you. I feel like what you just talked about with Uniting Miami is, what you're on a mission to do in Florida. And I wish you the best of luck. And we'll be watching. And I really appreciate you.
Thanks,
Debbie. Thank you.
And thanks for what you do with NewDEAL.
Thank you so much.
I have a lot of respect for the organization and for all.
We really appreciate it. All right, take care.
Thank you. You too. Have a great weekend.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to An Honorable Profession. Please subscribe to hear more amazing leaders. And keep asking your elected officials to be honorable. Boots Road Group produces podcast. I'm Ryan Coonerty, and because we keep things honorable, no tax dollars were used in the making of this podcast.